doors opened Friday, April the 18th, 1997, for the first Maryland Banjo Academy, around 150 students from 28 states, Canada, and even Sweden were carrying their banjos across the campus grounds. Although other types of banjos and styles of playing have their devotees, the decision was made to focus mainly on the traditional five-string at the Maryland Banjo Academy. And what a focus it turned out to be. The assembled players and banjo builders provided participants with an overview of this instrument from its days in the late 18th century to its use in the hands of the most modern creative players today. 200 years of banjo history and styles of playing were on display this lovely, windy spring weekend. George Wunderlich, who lives in Buckystown, specializes in recreating replicas of early American and Civil War era banjos. George's instruments are so highly regarded that museums acquire them for display. The Civil War marked the heyday of a performing style that began in the 1830s, the minstrel era. Pete Ross of New England has made minstrel-era styles and tunes a specialty. Pete often demonstrates the difference between basic clawhammer banjo as played today and its evolution from earlier days.
This is Roaring River. It's played on a fiddle tune played on plantations, by the slaves. Transpose it so I can play on the banjo here.
Civil War, soldiers on both sides carried back to their homes a new love of this stringed instrument with its animal hide stretched across a wooden hoop. The banjo found itself particularly well received in the homes of Appalachian mountain dwellers. It was in the mountains that it survived. After the war, the banjo flourished during the remainder of the 19th century and early into the 20th. In fact, banjo orchestras enjoyed great popularity in many regions of the country. Sometime after World War I, the banjo's fortunes hit a low point. Other more modern styles of music were in vogue, and by this time, the lonely five-string existed mostly in its mountain niches. In the 1920s, the recording industry exploded, giving the banjo a boost. With records came the parallel development of the radio industry. The banjo was exposed to a wider audience than it had seen in years. Soon the Grand Ole Opry started broadcasting. It featured the Dixie Dewdrop, Uncle Dave Macon, who performed as a modern-day banjo minstrel. Uncle Dave's fame gave the banjo a much-needed shot in the arm. Cordell Kemp, who learned directly from Uncle Dave Macon, passed this knowledge on to Leroy Troy, one of the instructors. This gives Leroy's playing a direct link to this early star of the Grand Ole Opry. Monroe, the father of bluegrass music, set the stage for the style of banjo playing that predominates today. In the 1940s, Monroe hired a young genius, Earl Scruggs, who astounded the music world with his explosive new three-finger style. By the late 1950s, another young man, Bill Keith, was teaching himself to play Scruggs' style. Later, he went on to create his own style of melodic playing, which was widely imitated. He discovered in the late 1950s that he could play fiddle tunes note for note and developed a technique that continues to attract new followers. And of course, Bill is also famous for the tuners he developed.
I put them on a tape, the old web score that I could slow down to half speed, and wrote it out in musical notation first. Then from the musical notation, you can look at small segments and say, isolate which notes must be coming from open strings. And then the notes in between open strings, you find the position and wherever you are on the neck. And so I deduced the tablature, and that later, my workbook later became the Earl Scruggs instruction book.
Bela Fleck has pushed banjo playing to new limits and has thrilled audiences worldwide. His tastes have led him to explore music for the banjo that has never been tried before. Miles is assistant director of the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago. He has a unique way of playing classical music using the clawhammer style. Schatz, one of the finest acoustic bass players today, also has a keen passion for old-time banjo. Reed Martin heard old-time music as a child growing up in the Midwest and decided to learn to play in the 1960s. His clawhammer playing has many devoted followers. Ken Perlman is considered a master of what is called melodic clawhammer. In addition to delightful sounds to their ears, participants in the Maryland Banjo Academy also discovered treats for the eyes. Several fine banjo makers and repairers joined the festivities.
Don't let your head get loose. Keep your bridge in the right spot. Change your strings at least once a month.
And which brand should we buy when we do these things?
Let me think. Stelling's a good buy. Yeah, that's a good buy.
Okay.
I'm Lowell Jacobs from Newark, Delaware. I've been building banjos on a part-time basis for about 21 years now. Started because of interest in mountain-style banjos, and I had a work project in the Hagerstown area, in the edge of the Appalachians. So out of Foxfire, I believe #3, that series of books, there's a chapter on building mountain-style banjos. So I was interested in a banjo, and I couldn't find anything that I could afford at the moment. So I said, you know, I believe I could build one of those, because I have been a woodworker. And I built one in a week. And then I said, you know, I believe I could build that a little bit better. Built a second one. 21 years later, I'm still building banjos, thinking that the next one I can do something on it a little bit better. As a matter of fact, I thought of something yesterday that I believe will improve the finish on the banjos somewhat, and I'm going to try it. The classic way that I do of trying things like that is to try it on a banjo, and if it doesn't work, that one stays home. It gets run through the bandsaw usually and thrown in the scrap box.
Yeah.
But if it does work, then it might become a standard feature. And that's the way, of course, that most banjo builders learn, because there's really no particular schools, or there's no apprentice program or anything of that nature. And most of us start out with full-time day jobs anyway, and we just grow into these things as a hobby.
Just want to tell you, I'm not real happy today. I'd rather have my truck because I like the license plate better. It's called Banjers, B-A-N-J-E-R-S, because I like them. I've been making them here for about 12 years. And we're sitting down, this Saturn must be broke down or something. We're at Banjo Camp here in Maryland and having quite a good time. We look a little tired because we haven't had any sleep. We've been playing this whole time. And this youngin' right here is my sweetheart. Her name's Patty. And she's going to help me make banjos next year, too.
Yeah.
If banjos are the fringe market of the American music marketplace, my banjos are the fringe market of the banjo marketplace. Everything I do is between the late 1700s and about 1865 or so. And Oddly enough, most of my banjos are either copies of museum collection pieces or things like this, which are from paintings and photographs, and we just try and do the best we can at putting together what the original would look like. And that's what I do.
What you got there?
This one is a copy of the banjo from the famous painting, The Banjo Player, of the black youth playing what we now know to be a Boucher banjo, but it had this kind of unusual curled headstock. Because as it's evidently turned out, the painter ran out of room on the painting to put a full Boucher headstock on it, so he had to shorten it up and put this type of a curled headstock on it. It's two-headed, head on the top, front and a head on the back, and it produces just a great sound.
Hi, my name is Jim Bollman, and I'm proprietor of the Music Emporium in Lexington, Massachusetts. I'm here at the Banjo Academy, both as a vendor selling banjos and some antique banjo ephemera, and brought a few banjos from the collection to show off. And we might go through these 4 or 5 instruments chronologically. The earliest instrument I brought is a Boucher banjo from Baltimore, Maryland. This instrument was made in the mid-1840s and is typical of it's one of the earliest factory minstrel banjos extant. There's about 20 of these Bouchers, original Bouchers, that are known. You can see the interesting OG carving on the neck. It has absence of heel, just a sort of a very flat neck. Normally just a few tensioners, friction pegs, fairly crude construction. Here's a very fancy Piercement fretless banjo, and we don't know too much about this. It's quite possibly British. Unfortunately, it's unsigned. It does have quite a bit of fancy inlay work, possibly Masonic, with all the Masonic emblems on it. A very lovely instrument. It was found in New Hampshire at a antique tool meet, and it has lovely marquetry as well as pearl in the fingerboard. It has wonderful marquetry devices in the back of the neck. This inside of the rim, the stick is carved and decorated. It has some curious wooden bosses on the inside of with the shoe bolts. Would be a strange outrigger on the 5th peg, quite a lovely little piece, and then a fancy Piercement scroll peg head. And I would place this banjo in the 1870s. This is a George Teed banjo. He was a maker on Houston Street, held several banjo patents starting in the 1860s. This is the most highly decorated Teed banjo that's been found so far. Very fancy wood marquetry vine in the fingerboard, heavy carved ivory pegs, lovely marquetry work around the rim, and we notice that it's an early closed back, so resonators were not necessarily a new thing in the 1915 or 1920. Early makers, Dobson, and probably the Buckby banjos made by Dobson, Teed, several other early makers experimented with having closed backs in the 1870s. By the 80s and 90s, the makers on their elaborate presentation instruments used pearl, wire, copper, etc. This is a August Perlman mandolin banjo. It dates from 1890s. It was invented as a sort of an amalgam of a mandolin with a 5-string banjo neck attached to it. A very sweet sounding instrument. It was marketed as called the new society instrument. So it was, the marketing ploy was to make it attractive to women in the Victorian era, giving them a lovely, quiet parlor instrument to play. This is a banjo made by the Haynes Bay State Company for G.W. Stratton. George Stratton was a teacher and had a store in Lowell, Massachusetts called Stratton and Handley. And this is indicative of some of the fine pearl work and engraving that the Boston banjo makers could do. I don't know how much of the detail we can pick up, but the cherub playing a banjo inlaid on the fingerboard and a few grotesque heads on it. Remarkable engraving. This is just about as good as it gets for the Victorian period.
waltz from 1855. This banjo was actually taken from an account of a Civil War soldier who talked about making banjos during the war when they were in the field. And because the hoops were hard to make and kind of hard to find, what they wound up doing is they said they would use cigar boxes or the bottoms of people's drawers from their homes or whatever else to make a banjo. And then from Albert Bauer in the 1890s, we learned that Civil War soldiers were notorious, the banjo players anyway, for going to the edge of a drum and taking a penknife and popping a hole right in the edge, so when the drummer went to tension the head, it would come completely out of the drum, they'd throw the head away, and they'd make a banjo out of it.